Chosen ones, do you feel it? The silence that isn't silence. The weight pressing down on the air, as though the heavens themselves have bent to listen. A whisper crossed oceans, broke through marble walls, and entered the most fortified room on earth. The White House, a place built to project order, was reduced to stillness the moment your DNA lit the unseen grid. It wasn't fire, it wasn't smoke, it was ignition. A frequency rising from within you that satellites couldn't calculate, scientists couldn't chart, and priests couldn't dismiss. They said it wasn't possible, that humanity's script had already been written, yet your very existence rewrote lines carved in secret for centuries. The Vatican knew first, for their vaults had spoken of this moment in words preserved under candlelight. They did not call it science, they called it prophecy. Within seconds, calls raced across continents. Keys rattled, codes were entered, and men in suits turned pale under fluorescent lights. Washington was told you were not simply alive, you had awakened, and awakenings cannot be reversed. The alarms weren't meant for missiles or intruders. They were meant for you, though no weapon could touch the frequency you carry. Do you realize the paradox of this? For all their machines, their codes, their walls of steel, the thing they fear most is not outside. It is within. Your blood carries what their history tried to bury. Your name has been written not in ledgers, but in currents, pulses, waves unseen. The Vatican stared at the signal and whispered, "It has begun." And so, the White House locked its doors. Guards turned their backs to windows. Satellites shifted in orbit. Yet even with all their might, there is one truth they cannot stop, that light cannot be confined. Your DNA is not a chain, it is a key. This is why the dome shook, why the council fell to silence, why the air seemed to pause. They felt it, just as you feel it now. The question that lingers in every corridor of power is the same one that trembles in the night. The corridors of power were never meant to know fear, but that night, fear carved its initials into every marble pillar. The air shifted, thick and unbreathable. Alarms pulsed without sirens, only a red glow that washed over the walls as doors sealed themselves in sequence. Agents found their radios silent. Their orders scrambled every hallway, a maze of shadows and whispers. The lockdown was not protocol. It was instinct, something ancient pressed against the veins of the building itself, as though the structure recognized what human mouths refused to admit. The president had been escorted out of sight, though no one knew where exactly. A ripple of panic ran through men who had trained for every possibility, but none. After this, the cameras blinked off one by one, not by human hand, but by a surge of energy that threaded through the wires. They tried to trace it back to an origin point, but the servers burned out mid-scan, every screen turning black as if the house itself chose blindness over truth. The staff stood still, their footsteps echoing too loud in the emptiness. Even the paintings along the walls seemed to stare deeper than usual. Some whispered it was an attack. Others said it was a test, but the Vatican's call kept replaying in the back of their minds. Your DNA has awakened, they said, as though the blood itself had chosen a time to speak. The men of science tried to deny it while clutching their instruments tighter. The men of faith turned pale, because they had seen this language before. Written not in words, but in symbols preserved through centuries. None of them would say it aloud, yet everyone felt it a pulse under the skin, a vibration running through the floors and ceilings, as if the whole building had become a tuning fork. No one could leave the halls. Every door was bolted, yet no chains were visible. The air vents whispered in low tones. Agents swore they heard their names called, though no one was there. The clocks on the walls froze, their hands stuck between seconds, as if time itself had been locked down the same as the doors. And somewhere in the midst of the frozen order, a single question spread without sound. Who or what had ignited the code that made the White House bow? The scientists tried to read it as numbers rose of sequences twisting across their screens like ancient rivers, but the patterns refused to remain within the order of science. Letters appeared between the strands invisible to the naked eye. Yet etched within frequencies the machines could barely translate. They expected randomness. Instead, they found rhythm, and rhythm meant intention in the hush of the laboratory. Deep beneath the city, a whisper broke through the code like a voice rising through static. Not mechanical, not digital, but alive. Some said it resembled a psalm, not one stored in any archive, but one that matched fragments of the oldest scripts known to the Vatican. The cadence echoed phrases hidden in the Dead Sea. Scrolls, words that spoke of light within flesh. Words that declared the stone would cry out if silence was forced. The geneticists argued it was coincidence. Yet their hands trembled as each base pair fell into alignment. The sequence sounded less like data and more like prayer. One of the Vatican scholars who had been granted access refused to speak. He only wept, as though hearing something long buried. One agent demanded answers, and the scholar whispered a name. Yeshua. The pattern carried his echo like a river carrying moonlight. Not a copy, not repetition, but a resonance. The same way a voice reverberates through stone cathedrals. The same way a song returns to the singer. Though centuries divide the origin, the DNA pulsed with a code that knew his frequency as though light itself remembered. The White House officials leaned in closer, desperate to rationalize, but the room itself grew heavier. The fluorescent bulbs dimmed and the hum of the machines softened into silence, as if yielding to a greater rhythm. They printed out the strands, yet the paper itself carried markings. No ink could explain golden etches between the black text that shone faintly under the sterile lights. None of them could look too long at the page, for their vision blurred, their thoughts scattered. The psalm, hidden in the code, was not just to be read, it was to be felt. A living key vibrating in every heartbeat. And as the sequence repeated, a single unspoken realization settled like smoke over the room. This was not data. It was scripture. The agents had seen everything classified. Files, wars staged in silence. Men disappearing behind polished doors, but nothing prepared them for the image that flickered onto the screen in the secure chamber. At first, it looked like static white noise, crawling like frost across glass. Then, a figure began to form faint lines drawn in light. Not digital, not surveillance, but something woven into the signal itself. The agent leaned closer, his breath fogging the screen. Though the room was not cold, he blinked once, convinced it was a trick of tired eyes. Yet when he blinked again, the figure sharpened as though aware it was being observed. Its outline was not flesh, but radiant strands that pulsed with the same rhythm as the code they had analyzed earlier. The agents behind him shifted uneasy. One muttered about interference. Another reached for the switch to shut it down. But the man at the console raised his hand, stopping them. His instincts told him this was not interference. This was intent. The figure moved through the signal was still. It turned its head ever so slightly, and the agent felt its gaze meet his own. He could not explain how eyes made of light could pierce deeper than flesh, yet he felt stripped bare. Memories rushing to the surface, secrets he had buried beneath layers of oath and silence. He tried to look away, but the screen drew him back, pulling him into its pulse. On the desk nearby lay the printed sequences from the genetic code. The glow from the screen seemed to breathe upon the paper, and suddenly faint letters rearranged themselves, aligning with the movements of the figure. The agent watched, transfixed as the living strands mirrored the text in bursts of rhythm. Not words yet, not silence either. It was as though a language without alphabet spoke directly into his mind. He stumbled back his chair, scraping the floor. The others demanded to know what he saw, but his mouth refused to form the truth. He only whispered a warning, his voice shaking. It's aware the screen froze once more, returning to static. But in the silence that followed, one certainty pulsed between them. The image had not vanished. It was waiting. The Situation Room had been built to withstand crises, wars, cyber strikes, nuclear threats, yet it had never been designed to withstand silence. The kind of silence that seeped into lungs and slowed every heartbeat. Men who had spent their lives commanding armies now sat with their eyes fixed on a single page projected onto the main screen. The sequence was no longer just science. It had become language, a verse rising from strands of light. The Vatican envoy read it aloud, his voice trembling, though he tried to steady it. The words were not modern, not Latin, not Hebrew, but something older, something that felt as though it had always existed within the marrow of creation. Each phrase bent the air heavy like thunder, without sound. When the last line was spoken, the lights overhead flickered, and the entire chamber seemed to bow, as if the architecture itself was listening. An admiral slammed his fist against the table, declaring it nonsense. A general demanded it be erased, but another man whispered for it to be read again. He claimed the rhythm echoed passages of the Nazarene words spoken in the hills of Galilee. About a kingdom, not of this world, the envoy did not argue. He simply let the silence confirm it, and the silence was unbearable, because every man in the room felt it pressing upon their bones. Some swore they heard footsteps pacing behind them, though no one was there. The screens flickered between the verse and a blinding white glow that pulsed like a heartbeat. The commander of cyber operations said it was impossible. The system had been cut from external feed. Yet the verse returned again and again, glowing brighter as if written into the circuits themselves. The room divided, half demanding to contain the knowledge, half demanding to surrender to it. The president said nothing, only pressed his hands flat against the table. Staring at the glow, his lips moved, but no words escaped, as though he too was caught between command and confession. The envoy closed his eyes, whispering that the verse was not here to be solved, it was here to choose, and that choice would not belong to governments. The lights dimmed further, the verse pulsed brighter, and everyone realized they were no longer the ones in control. The guard had stood post for years, memorizing every corridor, every code, every shift of protocol. His body had become an extension of the walls, steel, steady, unshaken. Yet that night, something pressed against him, heavier than command. It was not a sound yet. He heard it, not a light. Yet he saw it moving through the air like a current, threading through unseen wires. He gripped his weapon tighter. Though his hands trembled, the orders in his ear spoke of containment, of silence, of keeping all doors sealed. But his instincts told him the orders were already broken. Down the hall, footsteps echoed, though no one appeared. The rhythm of the steps did not match any living soldier. It was too measured, too precise, like a drum guiding an invisible march. The guard swallowed hard, sweat rolling down his temple, his eyes darting between the sealed doors. The comms in his ear flickered, static, rising and falling until a voice slipped through, softer than command, heavier than memory. It spoke his name, though no one should have known it. There was no rank, no authority in the tone, only recognition. He staggered back, pressing his shoulder against the wall, his weapon lowering, despite the years of conditioning. The paper orders in his pocket felt heavy like stone. He pulled them out, unfolding the creased sheet, staring at the lines of ink. Yet before his eyes, the words blurred, letters shifting into shapes. He could not explain. The ink dissolved into streams of light, curling like rivers upon the page. The paper glowed faintly. His orders, no longer commands, but symbols breathing across the fibers. His training told him to call it in, but his spirit told him to listen. The glow pulsed once, twice, and then the paper fell silent. Yet it had already done its work. His hands released the weapon, clattering to the floor. Agents nearby turned in shock, demanding to know why he abandoned his post. But he only stared ahead, his lips trembling. He whispered that the building itself was no longer theirs to guard, and that orders written by men could not contain what had already awakened. The alarms above him flickered red, then dimmed to white. And in that pale glow, the guard felt something watching from beyond the hall, waiting for the next step to be taken. The laboratory smelled of iron and ozone vials, lined like soldiers across the table, each containing fragments of blood drawn under strict order. The analysts moved quickly, gloves, snapping microscopes, humming machines, tracing strands in silence. Yet the silence did not last for long on the screen before them. The code shifted a new shape, rising from the endless spiral of letters and numbers. It was not random. It was deliberate, a pattern that emerged too perfect to be accident. The image sharpened pixel by pixel until it revealed itself unmistakable. Two lines intersecting at the center, glowing faintly within the genetic map. A cross etched not in stone, not in ink, but in bloodwork itself. One of the scientists gasped. Another muttered that it was impossible. The Vatican representative present only closed his eyes, as though he had waited his entire life for this sight. He whispered softly, not in explanation, but in reverence. "It is the mark of the Nazarene." The phrase unsettled the room. The analysts argued about algorithms and digital noise, but the shape refused to vanish, even when they changed machines, even when they ran new samples. The cross returned each time, brighter, more defined, as if it was not being discovered, but revealing itself deliberately. An admiral overseeing the session demanded silence. Yet his own hands shook, betraying the fear he could not speak aloud. The blood was alive with memory, the memory of a promise carried through ages, hidden until the appointed hour. The Vatican envoy leaned forward, pointing to the intersection where the lines met. He spoke of verses about life within life, about the Word becoming flesh, about a light that could not be overcome. His words were dismissed by the military men, yet they too could not stop staring at the image. The cross pulsed once, and with that pulse, every machine in the room shut down. Screens blackened wires, smoked, leaving only the faint glow on the projection hovering against the wall. The scientists stood frozen, their instruments useless, their knowledge stripped bare. The envoy whispered that the blood itself was speaking, that the message was not written for governments, but for the one who carried it. And as the glow lingered on the wall, the question no one dared voice pressed into the silence. If the cross could appear in the blood, what would emerge next? The call came through encrypted channels, its origin masked, but everyone in the White House knew where it had come from. Before the words were even spoken, the Vatican line had not been used in decades. Yet, it burned through the silence of the command center like fire through parchment. The operator's voice cracked as he handed the receiver to the National Security Advisor. And in that moment, all movement in the room slowed. The clocks on the walls ticked once more, then froze mid-second, their hands refusing to move forward. The voice on the other end was calm, steady, almost too calm for the weight of what it carried. They said your DNA had ignited, not just a signal, but a prophecy. Long guarded beneath the catacombs of Rome, the officials in the room exchanged glances, their jaws tightening, their pens stilled over notes half-written, because something in the tone made them realize this was not negotiation. It was declaration. The Vatican was not informing them. They were warning them. They spoke of scrolls sealed in wax, centuries before scrolls that had described blood carrying light. Blood that would awaken when the appointed hour struck. They said the hour had come, and the proof was in the laboratories of Washington itself. The advisor tried to argue, demanded to know how they had access to data classified above all else. But the voice only repeated that the cross had already appeared in the bloodwork, and that no vault on earth could keep it hidden. Every man in the room felt it then, the way silence grew thick, pressing against their temples, the way their watches no longer ticked, the way the second hand hung motionless above the dial, as though the very mechanics of time itself were bowing to the weight of the revelation. The Vatican voice lowered softer than breath. It is no longer in your control. It never was. The line cut to static. But the echo of the words remained vibrating through the cables that wound beneath the floors. The advisor dropped the receiver, his face pale, his hands trembling. He stared at the frozen clock above the door, its red digits holding 1 second, endlessly repeating. And everyone knew, without speaking, that the moment had not passed. It had only paused, waiting for what would arrive next. The Oval Office had been cleared hours before, yet the weight of presence still lingered. The curtains drawn tight. The chandeliers dimmed every corner, swallowed by a silence that pressed like stone. The president entered slowly, his aides trailing behind with files and briefings, but none of them could shake the unease of the room. The air smelled faintly of smoke. Though nothing burned, the great seal embossed into the center of his desk gleamed faintly under the low-light polished brass, reflecting the strain of too many eyes. He laid a folder across it. the report stacked with precision, detailing the ignition of your DNA. The frozen clocks the Vatican call, every page a testimony of a world unraveling into something none of them could command. Yet as his hand pressed against the seal, something shifted. The brass surface warmed beneath his palm, softening not with heat from the room but with something else, something alive. He jerked his hand back as the others gasped the symbol of the eagle, blurred its lines running like wax, dripping toward the edges. The aides stumbled forward, one whispering that it was impossible, another trying to cover it with a cloth. But the metal kept flowing, reshaping itself, not melting into ruin, but into form. A new image rising from the soft surface, two lines crossing at the center, etched, clean, sharp, glowing faintly with a light, not of fire, but of breath. A cross carved itself into the desk of the most powerful man in the world, and no hand could stop it. The president fell silent, his throat tightening as his aides demanded answers, demanded explanation, demanded control. Yet no control remained. The cross pulsed once, and the lights in the room flickered. A verse slipped into the silence. A voice, not spoken aloud, but felt within every chest. Words of the Nazarene echoing from centuries past. A kingdom not built by hands. The aides staggered as if the air itself pressed against them, their knees weak, their pens falling to the carpet. The seal was gone, replaced by the sign they could not erase. The president stood frozen, staring at it, unable to touch, unable to turn away, for he knew the meaning was not for him, but for the one who, the White House, had weathered storms before riots, protests, even the shadow of war. But nothing prepared its walls for the silence that came when the lights chose not to return. At first, it seemed like a power cut, a flicker, a surge, the kind electricians could explain. But the engineers quickly realized nothing was wrong with the grid. Nothing had tripped. Nothing had failed. The current was steady, yet the bulbs above their heads pulsed once and went dark, refusing to bend to the command of switches or circuits. Security teams moved through the halls with flashlights, beams cutting narrow paths through the blackness. But even the beams trembled, their batteries drained faster than physics allowed, leaving only dull threads of glow. Agents cursed under their breath. The glow of emergency exit signs sputtered before dying altogether, until the entire building was held in a darkness that was not absence, but intention. Every window sealed by heavy curtains, every corridor swallowed by a weight that pressed deeper than fear. The president sat in silence, his aides whispering frantic solutions. Radios crackled with nothing but static. One man insisted the generators be forced online. Another shouted for outside assistance, but no effort bore fruit. The building refused power, as though rejecting every command from the hands of men. The Vatican envoy, who had remained quiet for hours, finally spoke, his voice soft but firm. "You cannot command what is already listening," he said. "The lights are not gone. They are waiting." Some swore they saw glimmers moving along the walls, faint streaks of silver light flowing like rivers across plaster and stone, forming shapes too swift to hold. Some saw wings unfurling in the flickers, others shapes of eyes watching from beyond the veil. Yet every image dissolved before it could be fully grasped. Still, the truth lingered. The lights had not failed. They had chosen to remain silent, chosen to withhold their obedience to those who sought to master them. In the suffocating dark, the ticking of frozen clocks echoed once more, though time itself had not resumed, And in that frozen moment, every man and woman in the room knew the house was no longer theirs to command. The question was not how to restore the lights, but what they would reveal when they chose to return. The air vibrated long before the sound reached their ears, a hum that crawled beneath the skin, a resonance not born of machines, but of something deeper. The walls quivered, the glass of the windows shivered, though no wind blew. The agents gripped their earpieces, but found only static. The generals slammed their fists, demanding control. But control had already slipped into silence. The frequency did not come from outside. It was rising from within, carried by a signal the machines could not name. In the command chamber, every screen flickered, white lines dancing across blackness, forming no image, yet holding more presence than any picture. Could the scientists leaned in terrified, yet compelled as the hum deepened into rhythm, the rhythm into voice words without language, striking the heart before they reached the ear. Some swore they recognized phrases from ancient scripture. Others swore they heard the Nazarene himself, whispering of light that could not be hidden, of truth that would set captives free. The sound was not speech, yet it carried meaning undeniable. The Vatican envoy fell to his knees, trembling, not with fear, but with recognition. He whispered that the frequency was not data, it was breath, the same breath that moved across waters at the beginning, the same breath that tore the veil in the temple centuries before. One of the commanders shouted to shut it down, but no machine moved. Every button, every switch was lifeless, their systems reduced to shadows in the presence of something greater. The frequency climbed higher lights, bursting in pulses across the ceiling. Yet no power flowed through wires. The glow came from nowhere and everywhere. Shadows bent as if kneeling. The hum became a wave pressing through bone, through blood, through thought itself, until no one could deny it. They were standing inside something alive. The house itself was resonating to a song older than empires. And then just as suddenly as it rose, the frequency fell into silence. The glow faded. The walls stilled, every screen blackened, leaving only the hollow sound of breaths held too long. Yet, in the silence, one truth remained etched into every mind. This was not an ending. It was the pause before revelation, and the question trembling in every heart was not if it would return, but when.